Hi guys, so we are now in the second piece of the renal or urinary system lecture, and now what we're going to do is going to talk about the microscopic structure of the nephron. Okay, so remember that the nephron, they're going to be located in the cortex, but then they also have a little segment, which is this loop here that is going to go down into the medulla, but most of it will be in the cortex here. And those are going to be the functional units of the kidney. So when we talk about the kidney filtering the blood to make urine, each of these nephrons will do the filtering to create the urine, and then all that is going to collect together down into the renal pelvis. And I'll follow that pathway for you also. Okay. So here is the nephron, and you definitely need to understand the structure of the nephron for lecture and for lab. So what I like to do is, instead of just looking at it all together, which is a little bit like overwhelming, I like to break it up into blood vessels first, and then we'll talk about the renal tubes. Okay, so we're going to start with the blood vessels first, and I like to kind of follow the pathway of the blood through the nephron, and that helps me kind of get into it. Okay, so what we're looking at right here, so just to kind of review, if we're looking at this red line here, what we are is at the boundary between the cortex and the medulla. So this right here would be a renal pyramid. So this arcing or traveling in an arc shape over the top of the renal pyramid, this one right here would have to be the arcuate artery. Okay, so here's our arcuate artery here. So if this is the arcuate artery radiating out into the cortex, this right here would have to be the cortical radiate artery. Okay, so from the cortical radiate artery, we have a smaller artery vessel that is going to be called an arteriole. Okay, so it's just smaller and not as thick-walled. So that is called the afferent arteriole. Okay, so the afferent arteriole is going to take it into the glomerulus, and the glomerulus is a very specialized capillary bed, and what makes it specialized is that it is very high pressure, and that's very important for the process that occurs there, which is called glomerular filtration. And filtration just means forcing the liquid through tiny little holes to filter it, which will then be captured by the capsule. Okay, so the glomerulus is a very high pressure capillary bed. Usually as the blood flows through the capillary, it loses the pressure as it goes through. But the glomerulus is designed so that it maintains a high pressure the entire way. So usually a capillary is going to be fed by an arteriole and then drained by a venule. But glomerulus, because it's special, is going to be both fed by an arteriole and then drained by an arteriole. Okay, so the one going in is the afferent arteriole, and the one coming out is the efferent arteriole. So the way that I remember that in my brain is that A is before E in the alphabet. So A going in, E coming out. Okay, so afferent in, efferent coming out. And then from there, the efferent arteriole will kind of connect to another capillary bed, which is called the peritubular capillaries. And like most names in anatomy, there's a purpose for all the sounds. What does peri mean? Around. So what is it around? The tubules. So it is the peritubular capillaries because it's the capillary bed around the tubules. Okay, so you have the peritubular capillaries that is going to surround all of those renal tubules, and then it kind of goes down into around the loop as well. Okay, so all of the blood coming from the peritubular capillaries, they're going to be drained into the cortical radiate vein, and then into the cortical radiate vein, and then into the arcuate vein, which will then go into the interlobar, and then that'll go into the renal vein. Okay, so that's the blood supply there. Now what we're going to talk about is the nephron tubes. Okay, so coming in, afferent arteriole, glomerulus, efferent arteriole. Those are traveling blood, only blood in those tubes. Now the rest of it is either going to be called filtrate or urine. So the rest of the fluid. So surrounding the glomerulus is like a little, I think of it like a catcher's mitt, right? Surrounding the glomerulus is the Bowman's capsule or the Nephron capsule. Okay, so surrounding here is the Bowman's capsule or the Nephron capsule, or the glomerular capsule too. And what happens is, as the liquid in the blood, so the things that are small enough to fit through the tiny holes, they're going to be forced out of the glomerulus and then captured by the Bowman's capsule. From there, we're going to go into the proximal convoluted tubule. So let's break that down. What does the word proximal mean? So in anatomy, we talked about directional terms. Proximal meant closer to the torso, closer to the main part of the body. So it really is like closest to. So what is it closest to in this situation? It's closest to the glomerulus. Okay, so the proximal convoluted tubule will be the tubule that's closest to the glomerulus. Now let's look at the word convoluted. So if you go to the movies and you tell your friend, wow, the plot was so convoluted, what does that mean? It's a lot of twists and turns. It was hard to follow. It was in and out and all over the place. So looking at what your picture here, why do you think this is called a convoluted tubule? It just means it has a lot of twists and turns. That's all it means. Okay, so we've got the tubule that's closest to the glomerulus that is twisty-turny, the proximal convoluted tubule. So from the proximal convoluted tubule, which will contain filtrate, not urine yet, it has to be turned into urine. From there, it'll go through the proximal convoluted tubule, and then it's going to go down to this very sharp turn. Now notice that this little turn, this is going to be located in the medulla. So here would be the boundary between the renal cortex and the renal medulla. This sharp turn is called the loop of Henle. Now Henle is just some guy's name. So this is the loop of Henle. You could also call it the nephron loop. Okay, so the loop of Henle or the nephron loop is going to do a sharp turn and then come back up, and then it's going to empty into another twisty-turny. Now this twisty-turny is also called convoluted because it's twisty-turny, but the other word is distal. So what does distal mean? Okay, so proximal meant closest to the main part of the body, closest to the torso. So distal would be further along. Okay, so this just means that it's the tubule that's further from the glomerulus that is twisty-turny, convoluted. So the distal convoluted tubule, and then from there it's going to be dumped into the collecting duct, and by the time it gets into the collecting duct, now it will be urine. All the processes of reabsorbing and secreting things into it. Now it's urine. And then that's going to travel through the renal pyramids of the medulla and then dump into the major and minor calyces and then into the renal pelvis and then eventually into the ureter to go to the urinary bladder. Okay. So what I want you to do is try to draw this. Okay, and if you can, try to draw from memory first, and then if you can't, then come back. Okay, so draw it and then label all of these pieces. Eventually, you should get to something that looks similar to this, right? So you don't have to do it all fancy. And in fact, for the peritubular capillaries, I usually just do like a bunch of wiggly lines. And then but you should be able to draw the basic structure. Remember that this one's twisty-turny, hairpin turn, another twisty-turny, and then dumps into a straight one, which is the collecting duct. Okay, so I suggest that you go ahead and try to draw that. Okay, now what we need to do is talk about some more of the specific structures of how the nephron works to reclaim and secrete things into the filtrate to turn it into urine. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and pause. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording and then come back and give you some more information later.